Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman. Thanks for joining me. And the topic for today is large language models. The latest fool's gold, possibly? Let's take a look at this. If that phrase is something that hasn't been in your vocabulary for quite some time, that's pretty good. But let's take a look at what this is. Fool's gold was a substance called iron pyrite, and it became very popular during the gold rush days in California. And this particular substance was a substance and mistaken essentially for real gold. And we have that same parallel going on in technology. And it's a huge problem. And so some of the previous fool's gold that you've probably run into and you've had some issues with, and some of you may say it actually worked, but I'm going to suggest to you that most of the time it is fool's gold for the reasons described in this broadcast. And of course, we're also going to discuss the latest fool's gold, large language models, and why they are fool's gold. So, firms selling you models, capability maps, reference models, whatever you want to call them, or anything off the shelf that's on the internet or purchasable that has to do with architecture or strategy are some of today's fool's gold. Are any of those vendors selling you a best practice that will give you a competitive advantage? This is something you really need to think about. How can they sell you a best practice? Because where did it come from? Think about this very, very carefully. Where did that, in quotes, best practice come from? Is it actually, unfortunately and uncomfortably, intellectual property theft that you're actually getting? That may sound harsh, but as you'll see here, where did this come from? Maybe you should ask that question. Maybe you should ask that question of the people selling you these things. Because would you allow your best practices or your company's best practices to be provided to one of your competitors? Would you want or allow anybody to sell what you worked on so hard to gain a competitive advantage in your organization to some competitor or other organization? You know what the answer is. Of course not. Well, why are we being fooled then that we can do this? Well, artificial intelligence. It's been around for quite some time. And this graph sort of gives you an idea of where it came from the 1960s on through today. Lots of different things going on, ups and downs in the marketplace as we see these types of things. It is not that I'm going to be critical of the concept of augmenting your information. That's what we use to call an AI, because actually, when you use the AI commercially, the first word is artificial, which tells it all. Artificial meaning fake. That's not what we want to do. But let's come back for a moment to think about the components of essentially processing data processing. This is going to be fundamental to recognizing what the issues are with AI today and how to repair them relatively quickly and give you a gold that you can actually invest and continue to make even more gold rather than fool's gold, which brings us to the concept of information systems. That is the root, of course, for AI. It turns out, a little history here, for those of you that aren't familiar with technology per se, there are 4 divisions of an application or a system or program, whatever you're comfortable with. There's the procedure division, and this is the area that has really accelerated really because of the technology behind the computer chips and its brethren, so to speak. It is the processing speed and actions that have really geometrically increased over the last few years. Couple that a little bit with the second division of an application, which is the person-machine interface division, making it easier to do inquiries and things like that compared to what we used to do before. The third division is what we call the machine-to-machine division. In other words, the interfacing between different applications or programs and things like that. Once again, very much steeped in technology. And now it comes to the weak part, the fool's gold part of an application, which is the data. So let's take a look at that for just a moment. This is where this whole thing breaks down. And we're going to suggest a solution for you to get around this situation, to move you away from fool's gold and actually reduce your costs. Because what you'll see here is that conceptually this is not hard, but it's not instantaneous. So let's take a look at this for a moment, because what we'll see here is there's actually 4 types of training data that AI and other things in technology use from a standpoint of processing. Of course, decades ago, we used to be called data processing. What we were doing those days, processing data. What are we doing today? We're processing data. Whatever phrase you want to use, it's that same situation. So it's the data that we want to take a look at because it's now being used to train these processes in AI. In other words, the cycles, the processing, you want to call them processing cycles, you want to call them processing, giving you answers, the processing. But what is it processing? Data. And these engines are being trained on data. There's 4 types of data that they're being trained on. The first one is what most of these large language models are trained on. Internet-related stuff. Data on the internet with no provenance. In other words, no history of ownership. You have no idea where it came from. Stuff. You type in something and stuff comes back. And I'll use the word stuff at this particular point. You can make your own decision on the types and quality of decisions that are being made with these types of data. The second is very disturbing to people like ourselves and many others. And that is copyrighted data that is being used without consent. Copyright provides the exclusive legal right given to an originator or an assignee of intellectual property to print, publish, perform, film, or record literary, artistic, or musical materials, and to authorize others to do the same. Guess what? This is not happening. Not just for us as a small organization, but many others. And there is legal action being looked at by a number of sources in a number of countries to stop this nonsense. It's intellectual property theft. This needs to stop. I'm not sure why it's gone on this long, but I'm not here to judge these types of things. Sometimes it takes a while for good things to happen, even though bad things are happening to some. Some people have taken action on this a little bit early. And one of these is a highly sophisticated technology person, not really a highly sophisticated technology person, but a brilliant, brilliant business person. And her name is Taylor Swift. And when Apple announced their Apple streaming service, Apple Music, Taylor Swift wrote this email. to Apple. And I highlighted two sentences. I write this to explain why I'm holding back my album 1989 from the new streaming service, Apple Music. What is she saying to Apple? Time out. Time out. You don't have permission to use my music on your service. And what was happening in those days early on was Apple announced their service and announced, I would suggest very innocently, that they're going to provide this service to you and I for free for 90 days. Now, what they were actually doing was providing a pipe, not the music that goes through the pipe, so to speak, the oil. And of course, the oil of the information age now is data. They didn't have that ownership. And they were going to give us this music for 90 days. And Taylor Swift says, hold on a second, wait a minute. And she says very nicely here, it's not only me that's an issue. And she says humbly, I can afford this. But how about those other musicians that have something out there for 90 days? And that's about all that their music does. They're losing all that revenue. And what she said brilliantly, once again, is this last sentence. We don't ask you for free iPhones. In other words, Apple. You can't go to an Apple store and grab a free iPhone. Please don't ask us, provide us with your music for no compensation. Let me translate. Organizations need to stop stealing copyrighted information to train their engines. That's really parallel to what Taylor Swift says. Unfortunately, some of us do not have the strength and the, how should I put it, the popularity to make as much impact as Taylor Swift has. Now, class 1, internet information. Class 2, copyrighted information. Even if we say, you know what, that's the way life is. What's more important, even than that, is for you to recognize that that's not where the good stuff still is. The good stuff costs money. And the good stuff is usually behind a firewall or a paywall of some kind. And that brings us to number 3 in the 4 types of data that you can get out there. And what we call that is a balanced exchange of information between a person and a person, or a group and a person, et cetera, et cetera. Now, a balanced exchange, what we mean by that, does not necessarily have to be dollars. An exchange example could be an email address for an article or a presentation. And so, for example, at the Architecture Center of Excellence, ACOE, our organization, that's exactly what we ask for. We've got hundreds and hundreds of articles and podcasts and things like that out there, and broadcasts. We don't ask you for payment for a lot of that information. We ask you for an even exchange. If you'd like to get that, we ask you for that information. We call that a balanced exchange. I want to stress again, that is not in these AI large language models, because they're not giving us anything to get that article. So for example, this is what we would do here. We would have you, and this is true for Gartner Group, along with us, and many other organizations. If you want an article, Gartner asks you for some information, your email, an equal exchange. And of course, this training data isn't in the AI engines because they're not providing that information. And for those people that believe they can phony this up, I can't speak for Gartner. I'm sure they're doing the same thing. We validate your email address before we send you the article to make sure that there's some legitimacy on the other side. And so this is very common. This is what we use, a similar type of form, to provide you with a balanced exchange of information, because that's where the good stuff is. Because you know where it came from, who built it, what the sources are, it has full provenance. And then it comes to the 4th category, once again, where these AI large language models do not have access, which is what we refer to as true best practices. A best practice is a competitive advantage that both parties believe is of value for that exchange. It's not a best practice because somebody declares it a best practice. It's not a best practice because it's based on a popularity contest. It's based on real value that can be measured and provides an organization with best practice. A best practice is a method, process, procedure, framework, or approach that provides an individual or organization with a measurable competitive advantage in a given area of interest and is not generally available to others. It's the DNA of the organization that provides the competitive advantage. Again, number 4 in the classification of all the data that can be used for training. So for example, Forrester, an organization very similar to Gartner, I just grabbed this off of the internet. You provide them with a sum of money here, and then they provide you with a best practice. And the only reason they receive that kind of money is because it is a competitive advantage that people can use. Yes, best practices cost money. And of course, we have the same situation, for example, for our workshop for enterprise architecture or business architecture or soft skills. This is where you get the best practice. Now, I want to stress again, on our website, just like Gartner you saw there, there's many, many, many other no-cost options that we require essentially a balanced exchange on. But even further than that, the best practices for us and virtually every other serious advisory and consulting firm cost money. So what we can see here is that even if I ignore the intellectual property theft for just a moment, the LLMs out there, the large language models, don't have access to the real good stuff. So you can make your own choices there. So, how do we get there? How do we get to a situation where we can use models that have some degree, let me put it even more stronger than that, a high degree of confidence that it actually is quality that will produce and essentially provide us even more competitive advantage than we've seen before? How do we turn that fool's gold away and actually make gold and then make more gold? Well, what we're going to do just for a little while here is use the EACOE data architecture portion of our enterprise framework. And we'll very briefly just march you through how this can be done. And what we're going to be calling it is data modeling for AI. And even further, we're actually going to change the phrase AI to what we call EAI. This is what we believe will provide you with a real competitive advantage within this concept of those two words. And please notice that the A we're using is artificial intelligence, but we actually prefer enterprise amalgamated information. I know that's somewhat of a mouthful, but it's not intelligence that you're getting, and it sure isn't phony stuff that you're getting. You're getting information that provides you with the ability to make hopefully better, faster, and cheaper decisions to enable your business and enterprise strategy and your mission objectives. So within the enterprise framework, what we're concentrating on is essentially what we call the materials and things, or if you want to use a different term that's more comfortable to you, data. And this will take us through this concept of working through and getting a data source that can use these very powerful engines, the processing engine that is out there and very useful to us to be able to provide true competitive advantage, which will essentially drive us through the development process of an environment that provides us with a real environment that can be leveraged using this tremendously powerful now engine, again, the processing engine, but not the data, because of what you saw there as the 4 types of training data that are being used. So how do we suggest that you do this? This is one of many suggestions, and why we're showing this to you is you can do this on your own. Of course, it would be our privilege to work with you on this, but there's nothing that you're going to see here that you can't do today to get you the real competitive advantage and move away from the nonsense, frankly, that's out there that a lot of people are hyping and promoting. And as I mentioned, it's nothing new. So how are you going to do this? Well, you have a series of legacy applications. And what you're going to be using that for is for sourcing. Because what we understand, as strong or as poorly as your applications are, you know where they came from. There's provenance there. There's a high degree of confidence in what you have, hopefully, because you're using it all the time. And from that, we're going to extract out of that what we refer to as the data distribution center. And these are essentially an ontological representation of the data that you can extract out of there. And yes, it's going to take you some time to do that, because as you're building this data distribution center, you want to make sure if it's of an extremely high quality. You know, the data, the definition, the formats, et cetera, and that provides us with that base information that's there. And then you can feed the EAI engine, the commercial engines that are out there, with your own data to provide architected agile solutions for your enterprise. And once we have this established over time, that legacy will, quote, disappear to some degree, because the version of truth, the one version of truth, will become the data distribution center. I want to stress again, when all of this began decades ago, we used to be called data processing. And what we're doing today, strip it all away, processing data. There's been an incredible amount of advancement in the technology of processing, but woefully inadequate because of the concept of the data belongs to you. That's the fuel of the information age. And that phrase was mentioned by Sir Tim Berners-Lee in April of 2017. And I'm sure most of you that Sir Tim Berners-Lee was the person that actually invented the web. Pretty good credibility there. What did he say again? The data belongs to me. Translate. The data is the engine of the future. And that is today. And so we can move from that to an architected agile set of solutions, and that becomes the base of our information and essentially business optimization and organizational optimization for that. And once we have all of this in place, it will be a continuous loop to provide more and more understanding and more quality to what is going on in the organization. And this is because a very simple phrase that I learned in my engineering curriculum: an open loop system, meaning the internet and meaning large language models, produces defects. A closed loop system produces quality. It's quite simple. Or, of course, you may have other beliefs that we'll chat about in just a little while. Now, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and sometimes I get the following: Sam, you don't get it. You got the wrong technology. It is AI. So let's take a look at this one more time. Let's walk through what's actually happening. Here we go. The internet facilitates transactions. Software provides tools. AI uses data to drive decisions. How? By building models that map the relationship between data sets, which reveal patterns. It uses those patterns to make predictions, which in turn can be used to drive decisions, which results in new actions, which results in new data, and uses this new data to run the process again, updates the algorithms, which is now machine learning from experience with good or bad data. It's kind of simple. The larger the models get, and the more evildoers play with this stuff because they can, because it's out there, the worse it's actually going to be. It's all based on good data. And the use of that data internally is what we call EAI, through the concepts of a data architecture, an architected environment, which is the method of designing and constructing a data resource that is business driven, based on real world understanding, using verified data and implemented in appropriate operating environments. It's a data resource that provides consistent foundational across all organizational boundaries. One fact in one place to provide identifiable, available, high quality data to support business activities and strategies. And the EA training data then becomes the balanced exchange and best practices that you can look at. Yes, you can acquire these things from outside because you're actually paying for things or providing an exchange of information so that you can trace and track how your environment is being built. So it's your enterprise language model. If you want to dub something, the ELM, the enterprise language model that you're actually building, which is the pathway to an agile environment. Now, you can still do what you did before. You can build your straw house very quickly by continuing to do what you're doing, and you can feel really good about it. Or you can say, you know what, nobody's looking. So I'm going to build my stick house using intellectual property theft. I don't think anybody's watching. Or you can be serious about all of this and build your brick house that has substance that will last for quite some time and can actually help the organization run better. Because what we have to recognize, and this is kind of uncomfortable, is that the evildoers love language models, large language models. They love them because they've got as much access to it as anyone else. And they can be sitting anywhere in the world, bringing more and more bad data that influences these engines into the fold, and nobody knows where it comes from. And this allows, unfortunately, these cyber bullies, these cyber attackers, to eat your lunch even easier. And it's going to affect your organization and actually can wipe out the organization. Yes, this is a pretty harsh and cruel broadcast, but you still got choices. You can put on your wizard's hat. Hey, there's magic out there. There's no problem. Or you can supplement your wizard's hat by a wizard's wand. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to buy our way out of this. Or we wave our wand. Or we have the wizard's hat and the wand. More tools. That's it. More tools. Or we can face reality. The path to an enterprise, the path to an agile enterprise, the path to harnessing these incredibly powerful engines, the path to harnessing these incredible powerful engines is recognizing the engines are very powerful, but the data is extremely dangerous and weak. And by using EAI, you could address that. Again, it would be a pleasure for us to talk to you or assist you as you move forward. Now, this is who I am. Thank you for listening, and your journey to an architected environment that provides you with tools that give you competitive advantage is based on EAI. Thank you again.
Thank you for tuning into Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.